This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
A string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
The amount of victims in such a short time was unbelievable.
Real people losing real money, but the criminals are ghosts.
The anger, the frustration, the fear.
From the BBC World Service, this is Evil Core.
The story of a cybercrime case that stretches from small-town America to the backstreets of Moscow.
Listen now. Search for Cyberhack wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the History Hour from the BBC World Service with me, Max Pearson, featuring interviews from the Witness History podcast with people who experienced major events firsthand. This week, from the 1950s, an American communist who defected to the Soviet bloc.
I got this official letter from the Pentagon saying you are a member of 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 organizations. Report in to the military judge on the coming Monday.
Plus, how Norway's attitude towards immigration was challenged by a single book.
It really struck a nerve with a lot of people. Everywhere I went, someone would tap me on the shoulder and say, "I'm in the same situation as you. Please don't tell anyone."
And the global phenomenon which is Spot the dog.
We used to get loads and loads and loads of letters from all around the world, mostly from kids in school whose teachers would organize a project, and then they would all write letters and have suggestions and send in their own Spot drawings, and it was really, really fun.
That's all coming up later, but first an example of the speed with which a technology can sweep the globe and then almost as quickly disappear. In the early 2000s, BlackBerry was the phone that ruled the world, but within a decade it collapsed, its place in the market taken over by the touchscreen revolution. Sam Gruy has been speaking to the former co-CEO Jim Balsillie about BlackBerry's meteoric rise, the impact of a certain company called Apple, and the moment when he knew it was all over.
Do you give the authoritarian what he wants, or do you just say, I didn't do a tech company to allow totalitarians to kill protesters?
It's January 2011, and tech boss Jim Balsillie is about to pick up a phone call from Egypt's capital.
I'd been in Cairo, and Mubarak's state security guy at a previous visit wanted to meet, and they just want to meet you.
Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak had been in power for nearly 3 decades, but a wave of protests known as the Arab Spring was sweeping through the Middle East, powered by social media and an encrypted messaging service that authorities couldn't access, BlackBerry Messenger, or BBM.
I get a call from them that they pulled the plug on BlackBerry in Egypt because they're protesting in Tahrir Square, and they said, give us the keys, the encryption keys, we're not going to turn BlackBerry back on.
And what did you do?
Told him to go stuff himself.
Long before then, we're going back to 1998 and the headquarters of a small tech firm in the Canadian town of Waterloo. Jim and co-CEO Mike Lazaridis were trying to work out what to call their new wireless pager.
We were having a company called Lexicon that does naming. We're down to 2 finalists, and Mike really liked BlackBerry because of its alliteration and its symmetry.
As well as deciding the name, Mike had created the device and led the engineering side of the business, while Jim's role...
I looked after the commercialization and sales and the financing strategies.
And so then in 1999, you launched the first BlackBerry. Tell us about that product. What did it look like?
When we launched it, we had 2 versions. We had the 950, we had the 952, because the 952 had 2 megabytes of memory. Not 1, but the demand was tremendous. So it was just a mad rush, a mad explosion in a very good way, because people were hungry to have instant push communication, both in a corporate but also in a personal setting.
After the success of their pagers, in 2002, they launched their first smartphone. It was all over the news, like this on CBS in America.
very, very addictive.
I live with it. I can't live without it.
Yeah.
CEOs and VIPs were lining up to own the device. From Madonna to US President Barack Obama. They've become so ubiquitous, they'd even gained a new nickname.
Crackberries.
The Crackberry.
Dear BlackBerry.
But are you having a love affair with yours? Come on, are you?
I'm on my BlackBerry more than I spend time with my boyfriend.
You got to remember, that was the era where a doctor had a pager and you sent a page and then you jumped on a phone and called back. And there were some cellular networks, but there wasn't a way to message somebody.
The era of the smartphone had begun. By 2005, the company's annual revenue exceeded $1 billion for the first time ever. And Jim and Mike were named in Time magazine's 100 most influential people. But they weren't alone in trying to change the tech world.
We were in a sea of the big cellular companies, Motorola, Ericsson, Nokia, Siemens, and Sony. Yeah, you're swimming with the sharks because it's easy to get blown out. You sleep with one eye open. You're paranoid all the time. You know that you can, half the company is easy as double it. So yeah, they always made comments how paranoid I was and that I see monsters around every corner. And I said, because they're there.
But in 2007, everything changed.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
We're on stage at Apple HQ, where founder and CEO Steve Jobs is announcing his revolutionary new gadget.
And we are calling it iPhone.
I want to take you back to 2007 and the launch of a product. You might have heard of it, the iPhone. Were you aware at the time of the threat that it posed, not just to the BlackBerry, but all the phones on the market?
Yeah, 100%. At the time, Mike bought one, got one. We knew they were trying to hire people, so you knew they were coming up with it. And the unit, he said there's a computer inside. Verizon wanted us to, and Vodafone wanted us to create an iPhone response. So Mike wanted to out Apple with a clickable display called the Storm. So it was an innovation response and it was a commercial response.
It has no keyboard. And then, did it just click?
More than a year after their new competition had announced itself to the world, Mike and Jim launched their response.
Like a keyboard, just no keys. America's largest 3G network introduces the world's first touchscreen BlackBerry, only from Verizon Wireless.
A new, fully touchscreen phone. It was called the Storm.
The unfortunate thing was the clickable display product called the Storm didn't work. It was a disaster. We got 100% returns.
And people giving the phone back to you?
100%.
Because it didn't work.
Didn't work.
Was this the end of BlackBerry? Had the device finally met its match? Well, not straight away at least.
When the iPhone launched, we were 3 billion sales. That year, we doubled to 6 billion. Next year, we went to 11 billion. Next year to 15 billion. Next year to 20 billion. And by fortune, we were the fastest growing company in the world.
People still wanted non-touchscreen keyboards, but those sales continued. The market was rapidly changing.
Verizon went to Google to do the Motorola Android. So they created a market for Android. So now we had Apple at the high end, and about 100 Android phones were out there commoditizing the phone market. So this ended our smartphone lead.
By 2010, the newcomers had overtaken Mike and Jim's sales. And by 2012, the two CEOs stood at a crossroads. Carry on making phones or focus on the BlackBerry Messenger service.
That was the first time ever Mike and I didn't agree strategically, and he convinced the board, and we had a new CEO, and I lost that boardroom debate, and they won, and that's what they want. There was more of them than me, and you have to accept that. It didn't make sense to me. I resigned from the board. I sold my shares.
That must have been a difficult time for you to walk away from this thing that you'd built. Do you remember how you were feeling in that moment?
Yeah, I felt betrayed. I was not happy about it, but they were very, very confident.
It's February 2013, and millions around the world are tuning in to watch the Super Bowl. And an advert for the new BlackBerry.
In 30 seconds, it's quicker to show you what it can't do. The new BlackBerry Z10.
The broadcast is shown in 130 countries around the world in 30 different languages, but
it sold almost zero. It hit a wall. But I wasn't there, so I don't know the gory details.
Do you think they were trying to compete maybe too much with the iPhone and trying to create their own version of the iPhone rather than sticking with what had made the product so successful?
100% Mike wanted to out Apple, yeah. But that ship had sailed. Once the storm didn't work, which would have been, if it just was good enough, it would have been fine, but he tried to out Apple, and then they tried to outdo them again with BB10, but it was too late.
The former co-CEO of BlackBerry, Jim Balsillie, was talking to Sam Gruet. BlackBerry no longer makes phones, and in 2022 it stopped supporting the software on them altogether. And that story from the past might just be a pointer towards what might happen to some of today's products in the future. Jackie McNish is the former senior correspondent at the Wall Street Journal and author of Losing the Signal, the untold story behind the extraordinary rise and spectacular fall of BlackBerry. So once you had a touchscreen phone, Jackie, was that it for BlackBerry with its keyboard?
I don't think it was it. You know, from that first day when Steve Jobs walked onto the stage in San Francisco and introduced and announced the unveiling of what would become the iPhone, there was going to be a lot of lead time for BlackBerry to adjust to that. And BlackBerry's first response, Jim Balsillie and Mike Lazaridis, the two co-CEOs, their first response, understandably, was, well, that will never work. They basically put a browser in a phone, and the networks that BlackBerry used would not have allowed them to do that, because in those days, the networks for data communications were old country dirt roads. They had barely had the capacity for a lot of traffic. But what we would soon learn is that Steve Jobs had a special deal with AT&T in which they would invest billions of dollars to upgrade the network. And that was the piece that BlackBerry missed initially and misunderstood the seriousness of the threat that the Apple phone to their, rapidly growing BlackBerry business.
So it was the speed and the bandwidth of available Wi-Fi connections or internet connections on mobile devices, which was going to kill BlackBerry.
Yes, that's part of it. And I think the other part, which is sort of a lesson for businesses, no matter what field you're in, when you have a competitor like that is dominant in other fields and they're pointing their laser guns at your business, it's very difficult for a board, very difficult for executives to sit back and say, well, we have to rip everything up and start all over again. All those billions we invested in infrastructure for this product that's going to be outdated, we have to throw out the window. That's something that boards don't do. It's something that CEOs don't do because shareholders expect them to protect their investment. And I think that, there is very few other examples of the world of such rapid rise and fall as there was for BlackBerry. It was still growing after the iPhone was introduced, up to $20 billion in sales, but demand was slowing.
You say there are a few other examples. I mean, BlackBerry is almost a modern fable, but you've looked at these things. What are other examples of products which were incredibly popular for a while, but then disappeared?
I think there are a few other examples like the BlackBerry because the time element there was so compressed from rise to fall. I mean, we've seen, for example, you can think of Nokia, the Finnish conglomerate. Its mobile phones dominated the world, but they were slow as well to adjust to the Apple threat, and their operating system never worked. And eventually they had to sell their phone division. America is the home of these stories because in America, there's a much greater appetite by investors for risky ventures. There's not the same stigma if you fail. I think of Henry Ford. He declared bankruptcy before he founded Ford Motor Company, and we know how well he did. And there are many other examples of that in the U.S., and it's where they're willing to take chances and, you collapse and you can move on if you can come up with another good idea.
Is that why we keep getting new iterations of everything in the tech world? There has to be another version of a handset, another version of a website or something to keep the progression of innovation going. But at the same time, that also feeds this sort of horrible consumerism that goes along with that.
All of that is true, but I think if you think of sort of the Silicon Valley mentality, their motto is fail fast, fail often, because you've got to keep inventing and you've got to be willing to accept that it's going to fail and you have to be ready for that failure. So the big companies are fairly well insulated because they dominate their fields and also because they're constantly experimenting and they're not taking their success for granted.
That was Jackie McNish, author and former Wall Street Journal senior correspondent. Next, from the world of tech, we turn to the much more tactile environment of the printed page. But this is a printed page with a difference. In the 1970s, Eric Hill designed an interactive book about a yellow puppy called Spot for his 2-year-old son, Chris. Where's Spot and the follow-up books have gone on to sell millions of copies around the world. Rachel Naylor has been speaking to Eric's now grown-up son.
I did spend a lot of time as a young kid in his studio, and I absolutely loved all the drawings he was doing. And, when he would have a bunch of pages out on his desk, it was definitely a favorite pastime of mine and probably occasionally a great annoyance to him. I'm sure me rifling through the papers wasn't always the best idea, but he probably saw how enthusiastic I was about what's under here, what's under there, what's under here.
That's Chris Hill, Eric's son. Chris's curiosity inspired Eric to come up with an innovative new format for a children's book, Lift the Flap. He also discovered a gap in the market, a book for toddlers, as he told the Hennepin County Library in Minnesota in the USA in 1988.
At that time, there were some beautiful children's books, very illustrated and lots of words. And I thought maybe I could do my own interpretation with large, clear words and very clear pictures, which was my style. And also including the use of flaps, which incidentally is not pop-ups, they are flaps. They're meant to be very simply attached and opened. So I sat down and made up a dummy of the book and read it to Chris, and he loved it.
I do remember the excitement I felt with reading the book. And I mean, I must have read it, I don't know how many hundreds of times, or had it read to me. So there is sort of a core early childhood memory of finding this puppy and engaging in the fun adventure of wondering where this puppy is.
Where's Spot was published in 1980 and became a bestseller. And spoiler alert, if you haven't read it, you're about to find out where he is.
Naughty Spot, it's dinner time. Where can he be? Is he behind the door? No. And then there's the bear with the honey. Is he in the piano? No. Nope. There's a hippopotamus and a small yellow bird inside the piano. So as I'm reading this, I definitely do remember that all of these things were also very funny to me. I spent a lot of time laughing at these. Is he under the stairs? No. The big lion under the staircase?
Whoa!
Is he in the box? Nope, nope, nope.
No.
3 penguins in the box. There's Spot. He's under the rug. I always fell for this one. I don't know. I never remembered that it wasn't actually Spot. Nope. Try the basket.
A basket.
It's a tortoise.
And I know you were saying it was coming back to you as you were reading it then. Did you have a favourite bit that you found the funniest? Was it the twist with the tortoise?
Yeah. The plot twist that I continually fell for over and over again. Yeah, I did enjoy that bit, but like I said, I think the hippopotamus and the piano was probably the best bit for me. And here's Sally running to the basket, and there's Spot. Good boy, Spot. Eat up your dinner.
And that toddler you just heard reacting to the story was my 1-year-old, Teddy. And in case you didn't catch what he said at the end, that was, more please. Which is exactly what everyone else said to Eric after reading Where's Spot.
People start saying, okay, what's next? There must be something. I said, well, what am I going to do? I can't leave the poor little pup shut up in that basket for the whole of his life. And it was then that I realized that what I should be doing is reflecting the life of a young child.
So that's what he did. Spot's first walk came out in 1981, followed by Spot's birthday party in 1982, and Spot Goes to School in 1984. And as Spot went on more adventures, more characters were introduced, some inspired by Chris's family's pets.
There's a book called Puppy Love, and there's 2 dogs in that, one of which is a collie who was based on a dog that we had through my early childhood named Willie. And there was also a little terrier dog that was based on, my sister Jane had a little dog Candy when she was a kid.
In 1987, Eric decided Spot was ready to become a TV series on the BBC.
My whole life with Spot has been, I'm going cautiously, I do not want a sudden wham-bam explosion. After a while, though, I was convinced that they could do the right kind of rendering of Spot on television. I didn't want, loud noises, big, action, the way dog comes and skids. And I wanted them to be very much like the books, quiet, simple, nice colours.
Spot, Spot, a lovable Spot. He's soft and cuddly and he smiles a lot. If there ever was a pup to cheer you up, it's Spot, Spot, Spot.
Spot also became popular around the world, and Eric's books were translated into more than 60 languages.
His early business partner in the Spot venture was a man named Robin Ellis, who was himself an avid traveler, but I think also had some very forward-thinking ideas as far as, marketing these books. And they were published in a truly vast array of languages. Romani, Arabic, there were some Inuit editions made.
Spot's name was translated too.
That was actually a fun game that we used to play, was what's Spot going to be called? My favorite as a kid is, I think in the Dutch versions, he's Dribble.
Dribbel, dribbel, aardige hond. Je bent zo zacht en je springt.
Which I always thought was hilarious because I just always thought of dribbling as what you do in basketball.
Mijn kleine vriend.
Spot's also known as Spotty in Italy. And Pupe in Finland.
Missä Puppe on? Voi sitä Puppea.
And with Spot's growing popularity came a lot of fan mail.
We used to get loads and loads and loads of letters from all around the world, mostly from kids in school whose teachers would organize a project, and then they would all write letters and have suggestions and send in their own Spot drawings, and it was really, really fun. He loved getting those. And, he would respond as often as he could.
It seems to inspire many children to send me in ideas for Spot books. In fact, the latest Easter book is as a result of somebody writing in saying, why isn't there a Spot Easter book? I don't know. I do it.
And Eric did. Spot's first Easter came out in 1988.
I had a lovely letter sent to me from a grandmother who's a librarian saying that her granddaughter just had a new addition to the family and she wasn't too sure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And she said it would be lovely if Spot had a brother or sister.
And in 1989, Susie was born and made her first appearance in Spot's baby sister. There are now more than 100 Spot books and more than 65 million copies have been sold around the world. In 2008, Eric was awarded an OBE, a prestigious British honour by the Queen.
It's surreal. The funny thing is, Dad was well known, but he was mostly well known with parents of young children. He was never, I would say, in the public eye. And then occasionally things like this happen where it's like, oh, yep, I have to go and attend a ceremony at Buckingham Palace, which was pretty unique and special.
And how did he react to it?
I think it was a very, very special honour for him. Especially the actual reason they gave for the honour was contributions to children's literacy, which really meant a lot to him. So I think the fact that it was tied to that was something he was very proud of, something we were all very proud of.
Where's Spot inspired the creation of countless other Lift the Flap books for toddlers.
Are there writers or illustrators that are particularly influential in your work?
To me? No. I walked into the book without any idea of being an author or an illustrator, and to a large extent I still keep being a parent who's writing for a young child.
The words of Eric Hill, author of the Where's Spot books, and Rachel Naylor was speaking to his son, Chris Hill. I wonder if Spot will find his way into the Animals Who Made History collection on our website. Find out by looking for bbc.com/witnesshistory, where you'll also find our ever-growing archive of first-hand oral history.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Still to come, a naturalised Norwegian writer who changed that country's attitude towards immigration, and the horrific 19th century battle scenes which gave rise to the Geneva Conventions.
How many unfortunate men were left behind, lying helpless on the naked ground in their own blood? How many silent tears were shed that miserable night?
But first, from the 1950s, an extraordinary story that illustrates the power of political conviction. At the height of the McCarthy era, a time when the US government pursued suspected communists, Victor Grossman faced a terrible dilemma. When drafted into the army as a committed communist, should he fight or defect to the East? He's been telling Lizzie Kinch about his decision.
Oh, I was what they call a red diaper baby. My folks were already infected.
That was Victor Grossman, who was born in the USA in 1928.
I grew up at a time in New York City, in Manhattan, which was still at the end of the Depression. I have recollections of sad-looking men standing on line to get soup because they couldn't get jobs. And then what made a strong impression on me, the war in Spain. I went with my cousin collecting money, Save Madrid.
At high school, Victor joined the Young Communist League. He won a place at Harvard University, where he studied economics and continued his political activism.
We set up this group at Harvard, which remained secret because everyone was afraid of the future career. At the same time, we were very active. The atomic weapon question was very, very hot. And so was Churchill. Churchill had been invited to Harvard, had just made his famous speech about the Iron Curtain, and we wanted to protest that.
When he graduated in 1949, Victor went to work in an air conditioning factory, answering the party's call for more blue-collar workers. He did not tell his new colleagues about his Harvard degree. This was not a good time to be a communist.
Communism in reality is not a political party, an evil and malignant way of life. An international criminal conspiracy.
In February 1950, Senator Joseph McCarthy made his famous speech, claiming he had a list of 205 communists who were working for the State Department. A few months later, the Korean War broke out. America was now militarily engaged in stopping the spread of global communism.
United States Air Force units doing a round-the-clock job of delivering death and destruction to communists.
One day in January 1951, Victor received a letter that would change his life. He was drafted into the US Army.
I was really basically frightened at the idea of being drafted. I had no idea of what I would do if I was sent to Korea. I can't shoot at Koreans. Not only that, I didn't know whether they knew of my awful background or not.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
That's not the question.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Are you a member of the Communist Party?
Victor's fears were due to the McCarran Act, which passed in 1950. The act stated that any members of the Communist Party or other leftist groups had to immediately register with the government or face up to 5 years in prison. Victor had not registered, which caused problems when he was drafted.
When you were inducted, you had to sign a statement with a list of about 120 organizations, of which about 110 were leftists. And I had been in a half a dozen at least of these. Should I sign this thing or shouldn't I? If I refused to sign, I was in trouble because I hadn't registered. If I signed, I was in trouble because that's lying. I didn't know what to do. And we were being rushed through because everybody was just signing like that. I signed. And that meant for 2 years I have to keep my mouth shut.
Victor was not sent to Korea and was instead stationed on an American base in Germany in the US zone of occupation. Germany was then divided in two. The east was the Communist German Democratic Republic, the GDR, while the west was the Capitalist Federal Republic of Germany, which remained occupied by Britain, France and the USA till 1955. Victor learnt German and Morse code and tried to keep his head down. But as he later found out, the FBI had been keeping track of him since his Harvard days.
In August 52, I got this official letter from the Pentagon saying, you are a member of 7 organizations. Report in to the military judge on the coming Monday, and that was a Wednesday. For concealing your membership, there was a penalty up to $10,000 and up to 5 years. 5 years in military prison? No. I'm taking off. I'm leaving.
Victor decided to flee to the Soviet Union, but had no idea how to cross the Iron Curtain.
I took a risk and asked in the city of Nuremberg. I went to the office of the Communist Party in uniform, trembling with fear, to ask their advice as to how to get to the East. But they didn't trust me. They were in trouble already there, too. They were about to be outlawed. The man said, all I have is a bicycle. I can't help you.
With time ticking, Victor looked for other places to cross the border. He realised that in Austria, which was also still occupied by the Allied powers, the town of Linz was near a place where the American and Soviet zones were divided only by the Danube River. He had taken some train passes reserved for American soldiers and set off.
I got to where I thought was near, but then I heard whistles, which seemed to me signals of possible American military. So I withdrew from there and fell asleep in the wood in a park. Woke up, and it was already light, so I lit out and found the Danube, threw my shoes in, my new camera, my jacket, and I had to swim across. The current was moving east, which was in my favor. I got across expecting to see the Iron Curtain, if not Soviet tanks, then at least guards with machine pistols. I couldn't find nobody. I walked and walked as hidden as I could, but then I gave that up and I must be on the Soviet side now. So I started openly walking. That's when the cops picked me up.
Victor was taken to the Soviet headquarters in Austria, in the town of Baden, near Vienna.
They took me into this cell in the cellar with an armed guard. It was not a pretty cell. It didn't even have a bed. And I was there for 2 weeks.
Victor was given new clothes, new shoes, and a red tie.
And they drove me, and I didn't know where. After a while, we went right through Vienna. I was a bit nervous, to a border. And when we crossed the border, the windows were shaded, but I could see outside. I saw Czech letters, but they kept up right past Prague, so it must be Poland or East Germany. Where's the borderline in there? It was East Germany.
Victor spent 6 weeks in another cell in Potsdam before he was released into East Berlin. Soon he met his future wife.
Meeting her made all the difference because she saved me from homesickness, basically. I had a twinge or two, certain things I regretted missing, but by and large, she saved me from that.
After first working in a factory, Victor ended up becoming a journalist in the GDR, writing books on US history and culture. He and his wife had 2 sons and raised them in a flat on Berlin's Karl Marx Allee. Even though he's now 97, he continues to work as a journalist while also publishing books about his life, the Cold War, and the GDR.
When I was able to go back to the United States in 1994, I met a couple of people who had faced the same situation as I had.
He found out he probably wouldn't have been sent to prison for lying on his form way back in 1952.
Looking back, perhaps it was not really necessary.
Victor's story remains unusual. There were many more defectors who fled across the wall from east to west, fleeing either political persecution from East Germany's notorious secret police or tough economic conditions. But Victor, who remains a convinced communist, told me that he thinks he made the right choice.
I still believe that the GDR, which had many, many faults, still represented one step in civilization ahead of the United States. I don't really regret it. I've had a very interesting life. My mother, who visited 6 or 7 times, in her last visit, she said, who knows, maybe you had it better here than if you had stayed in the States. And it's possible.
Victor Grossman, who defected to the Soviet bloc back in 1952, was talking to Lizzie Kinch in that Whistledown production for the BBC World Service. Now, for a special addition to the History Hour podcast, I'm including this week's sporting witness. And with the Women's Rugby World Cup about to start here in the UK, we're looking at the competition's origins. It's the story of how 4 women organised the first such event, also held in Britain in 1991. Uma Doraiswamy has been speaking to one of those 4 pioneers.
My name is Alice D. Cooper, and I was press officer and one of the founding 4 of the Women's Rugby World Cup in 1991.
Alice had an unusual way into the sport.
I went to a pub with a mate because I'd been told there were lots of hunky rugby players in it. It's the Sun Inn in Richmond. And ended up talking to 2 of the players at Richmond who said, we could do with tall players like you. Why don't you come and give it a go? So I went and found my old school lacrosse boots and turned out about 10 days later and played for them for close on 7 seasons.
She must have had loads of experience organising sports tournaments to take on something like a World Cup.
Oh, no. No. Deb certainly had organised some big events, but not on a grand scale.
Deb's is Deborah Griffin. More of her in a minute. There had been European Cups, but the Americans, New Zealanders and Canadians wanted to get involved too, so Debs started things off.
She went and presented to the Women's Union the idea of a World Cup, and they said, OK, well, you organise it then. And she said she'd only do it if she could choose her team. So she chose me as press officer because I had a writing and creative work background, Sue Dorrington, who's an event manager, to do events and sponsorship, and Mary Forsyth, who is an accountant, to handle money. Now, we all played for Richmond, so we were all established teammates. We all knew each other really well. None of us can remember being asked, but none of us remembered saying yes either.
This year's women's tournament is likely to set world records for attendance for the women's sport. There's huge demand for tickets, with a real mix of people enjoying the game. But back in 1991, attitudes to women playing were very different.
Pretty misogynistic. What are these girls doing? And you get hilarious headlines like, which one's the hooker? Scrumptious. And then there was kind of a four at, let's go and look at some girls rolling in mud. And it was so frustrating trying to get to be taken seriously.
And even the sports authorities weren't open to the idea of the tournament.
We went to the unions. We couldn't get any support, any funding, and they couldn't see that actually what we were doing was expanding the game, expanding interest in the game. It was all incredibly grudging, incredibly difficult. We weren't going to ask permission, we were just going to do it. You start with putting out, does anybody want to come and play in this tournament? That was the start. And then second place, who's going to play where and when. Then all of the matches had to be organised, merchandise to organise, liaison between someone who spoke the language would go and be liaison between us, the organising committee, and the team. You had volunteers who were match managers, had volunteers who handled merchandising. We had a whole army of people who gave up their holidays for a fun weekend in South Wales to come and make it run.
And progress was slow.
Don't forget, there was no internet. Everything was done by snail mail and fax machines. Countries were quite slow to agree to come because they obviously had to pay for their own kit, their own travel, their own accommodation and their own food. So it was a big outlay, particularly from the countries coming far and wide. And then a rumour went out about 3 months beforehand that it was going to be cancelled. And we had to fax everyone, no, it is happening. But the Russians were slow to decide whether they would come or not. And so we ended up with 4 pools, but we only had 11 countries. And we thought, it's just so inconvenient to have one pool with only 2 teams in it. And then on the day we decided we're going to pick the who's in which pool, the French went suddenly, OK. Literally the 11th hour, and suddenly we had 4 pools of 3, and then the tournament was balanced. Every step forward, there was about 5 steps back.
South Wales was the chosen location for the tournament as it had lots of grounds close together, as well as university accommodation that could house all the players. April came round and the teams were in Wales, apart from the Russians.
They arrived at Heathrow and said, hello, we've arrived. No, you're meant to get yourself to Cardiff. We haven't got any transport. So we then had to organise everybody and anybody in a minibus, in a big car, in anything to go and get these Russians who were huge. I mean, one of their props was 6'4" and wore her army uniform the whole time. Plus, there were 2 coaches and 2 minders who we were sure were KGB. And they had the middle of a toilet roll stuffed full of money. But the whole time they kept very, very tight control on the girls. They turned up with a big crate of stuff. I don't know how they got it through customs. They had vodka, caviar, nasty little watches, little pennant banners things, a lot of cucumbers, all sorts of knickknacks you couldn't possibly want. Debs arrived in my press office going, "I've just had a call from HM Customs and Excise. They said the Russians are selling vodka on this town hall in Cardiff. You must go and stop them." And that's what they were doing. They were flogging their vodka to try and make a bit of money to buy food so they had enough energy to play. So, of course, HM Customs were a bit grumpy about this, but there was a complete language impasse between the Russians and the Welsh executives. So they just stopped, and that was the end of that. But it got us enormous amount of press coverage, and suddenly we were on the news. Suddenly we were in the mainstream paper, on the sports pages, and it suddenly got the tournament noticed. So it was a twin-edged sword. On the first day of the tournament, the weather was biblical. I mean, this is like 9th of April. The weather was so bad, it was like horizontal ice, that every other sports event had been cancelled across the UK. The fact that every other, the men were so soft that they wouldn't play in that weather. But yeah, no, we went out and played, we were fine.
And whilst the matches were going on, Alice was kept busy.
I would get up at 6, be at my desk at 7 because I had to get the programmes to the printers. No digital printing then, which then had to be printed and back to me by 12. Then I would have to jump in the car, drive to the ground, try and find the ground, get the programmes to the merchandising, do press interviews. Sometimes I had to do PA as well, so commentate on the match, try scored by whoever. Press interviews. Often the match manager would do a match report. Get back, type that up, get it on the wires if I could, more press interviews, do whatever I could, and I would be there till 2 a.m.
Just in case you're interested about what happened on the pitch, USA won the final, beating England 19 points to 6. In 1998, the International Rugby Football Board did eventually take responsibility for the tournament, making the 1991 and 1994 competition official World Cups. Looking back, Alice thinks the organisers' pioneering efforts are responsible for the healthy state of the game.
If we hadn't done what we did in 91, instead of being the 10th World Cup in August, September this year, it might be the 3rd or 4th. Because until that, there was no world rankings. No one knew how good these other countries were. And nobody knew how, if you put this country against that country, how they're going to play. So there was no comparison, there was no track record, and now there was. So it started a whole load of balls rolling in lots of directions. If we hadn't started the ball rolling, I think we'd be a long way behind now.
Alice D. Cooper was speaking to Uma Doraiswamy, and full coverage of the Women's Rugby World Cup is on bbc.com/sport. Next, a moment from the past which throws a particular light on an issue exercising politicians and populations right now: immigration. In 2010, a book was published in Norway that transformed the way people looked at irregular or paperless immigrants. It triggered a government crisis and a change to Norway's immigration regulations. Lars Bavanger has spoken to the author of that book.
I was born in North Ossetia and lived there while I was a child. And then around 2000, my family ended up as refugees in Norway.
Maria Amalie was 12 when her family fled her childhood home in Vladikavkaz, the capital of North Ossetia. The Russian Republic borders Chechnya and had been affected by regional violence and instability for some time. Maria's father had been a successful businessman, but, she says, like what happened to many others deemed to be on the wrong side of the political leadership at the time, the state seized all their assets. Her family also lived with the threat of kidnapping, or even worse.
There was not a lot I remember or really understood of what was happening, but I also felt that was not a place we could survive.
The family of 3 spent their first year in an asylum centre south of the Norwegian capital Oslo, during which time Maria joined the local school.
me and my mom went to visit the local principal of the local school, and then we persuaded him to let me study, and that I would come back after the summer and speak fluent Norwegian. That was his challenge to me. So we kind of made a deal, and then I started studying. And during those 2 years, our asylum application was rejected.
The family knew this meant they could be deported at any time. With the support of the local community, they decided to stay and somehow flew under the radar of the Norwegian authorities. Maria graduated and secured a place at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. Her master's degree in Science, Society and Technology were the only papers she had, and life as an adult undocumented immigrant, or an illegal immigrant in the eyes of the law, began in earnest.
So in order to support myself through university, I put an ad in the newspaper and I said I can clean houses, because that felt like the most honest way to earn money, even though I couldn't earn money in legal way. I couldn't get any, not a bank account. I couldn't have a phone number. And the other aspect of being undocumented is that you are very vulnerable if you are sick. I think you can trust most doctors, but you still feel very unsafe, because anyone can just report you and then the next day you might be deported.
Because Maria had remained in the country for several years after her family's asylum application was rejected, she faced deportation and at least a 5-year ban from returning to Norway, perhaps more.
I was very, very afraid, but I felt like I needed to do the right thing. I just saw my opportunities, either I continue living like this in Norway, I continue clean houses with a master's degree and no hope. And one day someone will report me and then I'll be deported and I'll be expelled and I'll lose Norway forever. Or I write a book, I tell about how it is to be undocumented, I support the cause of a lot of people in the same situation, and then I will be expelled and banned as well. I just had this clarity that I should do this, because at least I will be creating some impact, giving a face to people who are in this situation.
So Maria wrote her book and called it Illegally Norwegian. It was published in September 2010 and became an overnight sensation. On the cover, her portrait and name. Suddenly, Maria's face was in every window of every bookshop across the country. She was widely praised in the media and by the public for daring to give a face to the thousands of undocumented immigrants in Norway and beyond. While some pointed out there were many like her who did not get the same attention, few, if any, criticised her decision to try to stay.
It really struck a nerve with a lot of people. Everywhere I went, someone would tap me on the shoulder and say, "I'm in the same situation as you. Please don't tell anyone."
Maria's lawyer had asked for her rejected asylum case to be overturned, arguing she came to Norway as a child without any control over her situation. 4 months after the book's publication, her case was dismissed. That same evening, she was arrested in the street by 8 police officers.
I really didn't understand what was happening until one of them just stood in front of me with a police badge and said, "We're here to take you to Trondheim."
Trondheim is Norway's national immigration detention centre.
"We have a decision that you will be deported shortly." The 3 hours while I was sitting in the car with the police, they did admit that they read my book and that they were just doing their job. And the next day was crazy. Norway woke up to a lot of headlines about me.
Thousands of people gathered in Norwegian towns and cities to protest her arrest, detention and impending deportation. After an appeal, she was allowed out of the detention centre but had to report daily to her local police station with a packed suitcase because she might be deported any day.
Every morning there was a lot of journalists reading me, which became a little bit comforting because they cared and they followed this. And then until one morning, they suddenly didn't let me out. And then they said, "We're deporting you today." And then I just broke down because I just fell on the floor. And then they drove me to the airport and deported me.
Good afternoon and welcome to Aeroflot's flight 2122 to Moscow. In 5 to 10 minutes, we are ready for boarding here at gate.
When I went through the border control in Moscow, the border control takes me aside and they say, "What is wrong with Norway? You are Norwegian of the Year and they are still deporting you."
Her arrest and deportation created turbulence in the then Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg's Labour-led coalition government.
Oppfyller man de kravene, så skal man få bli. Men hvis man ikke oppfyller de kravene, så kan man ikke regne med å få bli.
Stoltenberg, who would later serve as NATO Secretary-General, told Parliament that people who did not fulfil Norway's asylum criteria must leave. His coalition partner, the Socialist Left Party, had pushed for a more liberal immigration policy and threatened to pull out of government if a solution was not found. Even the right-wing Progress Party argued it was more pressing to deport immigrants who had committed serious crimes than to send someone who was well integrated into Norwegian society, like Maria, back to Russia. The result? A change to regulations allowing rejected asylum seekers with a job offer in Norway to return much sooner than after a 5-year ban. Maria already had a job offer from a tech magazine in Oslo. After about 1 month in Moscow, she was able to return. After 10 years, she eventually got Norwegian citizenship and became a serial entrepreneur.
I co-founded a company called Startup Migrants. We do crash course in entrepreneurship with young multicultural people all over Europe. Because one thing I learned is that your refugee or migrant experience, it is actually the best MBA you can have, because you learn a lot about resilience that is needed in building a business, and you also learn about taking a risk, but calculated risk.
Maria Amelie, the Norwegian author, entrepreneur and one-time deportee, was speaking to Lars Bavanger. Finally this week, the Geneva Conventions, a series of treaties governing the conduct of war. They originate with a Swiss businessman, Henri Dunant, who witnessed a battle in the mid-19th century. It was a moment that changed the history of how the world views conflict and the administration of aid to the wounded. Here's Rachel Naylor.
It's the 25th of June, 1859. Henri Dunant is the president of Mons Gemelin Mills, which grows and processes wheat grain. He wants to use some farmland in Algeria, but he needs permission. Impatient for answers, he's decided to take his request straight to the top, to Emperor Napoleon III. So he's come to Solferino in northern Italy to speak to him. There's just one catch. There's a war on.
Every mound, every rocky crag is the scene of a fight to the death. Bodies lie in heaps on the hills and in the valleys. Here is a hand-to-hand struggle in all its horror and frightfulness. Austrian and Allies trampling each other underfoot, killing one another on piles of bleeding corpses, felling their enemies with their rifle butts, crushing skulls, ripping bellies open with saber and bayonet. It is a sheer butchery, a struggle between savage beasts, maddened with blood and fury. Everywhere, men fell by thousands, with gaping wounds in limbs or bellies, riddled with bullets, mortally wounded by shot and shell of every kind.
This is an excerpt from Henri's book, A Souvenir de Solferino, A Memory of Solferino, which was published in 1862. But he wasn't just shocked by the violence of the battle, he was also struck by the lack of protection offered to those providing aid.
The canteen women moved about the field under enemy fire like the soldiers. They were often wounded themselves as they went among the wounded men, lifting their heads and giving them drink as they cried piteously for water.
Henri was also surprised by the lack of aid itself.
Though the army, in its retreat, picked up all the wounded men it could carry in its military wagons, how many unfortunate men were left behind, lying helpless on the naked ground in their own blood? How many silent tears were shed that miserable night, when all false pride, all human decency even, were forgotten? The townspeople gave all the blankets, linen and mattresses they could spare. The hospital of Castiglione, the church, the police barracks, were all filled with wounded men, piled on one another and with nothing but straw to lie on. Oh, the agony and suffering during those days. Oh, sir, I am in such pain. Several of these poor fellows said to me, "They desert us, leave us to die miserably, and yet we fought so hard."
Henri couldn't stand by and watch. He took it upon himself to organise aid for the wounded soldiers.
I adopted in particular one of the Castiglione churches called, I think, the Chiesa Maggiore. Nearly 500 soldiers were there, piled in the church, and 100 more lay outside on straw in front. The boys of the neighborhood ran back and forth between the nearest fountains with buckets, canteens, and watering pots. The distribution of water was followed by issue of soup and beef tea, which the quartermaster service were obliged to make in enormous quantities. On the Monday morning, I sent my coachman in Brescia for provisions. He came back a few hours later with a carriage loaded with mallows, elderflower, oranges, lemons, sugar, sponges, linen bandages, pins, cigars, and tobacco.
It wasn't just the provisions Henri took charge of, but willing, and some not so willing, volunteers too.
We had obtained some new recruits. First, an ex-naval officer, then a couple of English tourists who came into the church from curiosity and whom we seized and held practically by force. We were also given help by an Italian priest, 2 or 3 casual travelers and onlookers, a Paris journalist, and a few officers whose detachment had been ordered to stand by in Castiglione. The woman of Castiglione, seeing that I made no distinction between nationalities, followed my example, showing the same kindness to all these men whose origins were so different, and all of whom were foreigners to them. Tutti fratelli, all our brothers, they repeated feelingly.
Buoyed by his success, Henri came up with a plan.
Oh, how valuable it would have been in those Lombardy towns to have 100 experienced and qualified voluntary nurses. As it was, there was no time for those who knew their business to give the needful advice and guidance, and most of those who brought their own goodwill to the task lacked the necessary knowledge and experience, so that their efforts were inadequate and often ineffective. In the face of so great an emergency, what could be done by a handful of enthusiasts, all isolated and dispersed?
The Battle of Solferino was one of the bloodiest of the 19th century.
The total of killed and wounded Austrians and Franco-Sardinians numbered 3 field marshals, 9 generals, 1,566 officers of all ranks, and some 40,000 non-commissioned officers and men. 2 months later, these figures increased by 40,000, dead or in hospital from sickness or fever. Leaving all questions of strategy and glory aside, this Battle of Solferino was thus, in the view of any neutral and impartial person, really a European catastrophe.
Something had to be done. Henri came up with 2 ideas. The first was about creating associations of trained volunteers in different countries to help those injured on the battlefield.
If an international relief society had existed at the time of Solferino, what endless good they could have done.
The second idea was an international treaty, which would recognise the neutral status of medical services and the wounded during wars.
A convention, inviolate in character, which might constitute the basis for societies for the relief of the wounded in the different European countries.
Henri knew he had no time to waste.
Is it not a matter of urgency, since unhappily we cannot always avoid wars, to press forward in a human and truly civilized spirit the attempt to prevent, or at least to alleviate, the horrors of war? The idea should be presented to the different branches of the great European family, and that it should secure the attention and the sympathy of all lofty souls, all of hearts which can be stirred by the sufferings of their fellow men.
So that's what he did. Henri travelled Europe promoting his ideas. In February 1863, a year after his book was published, Henri held a meeting in Geneva, in Switzerland, to discuss his plans with 4 others, 2 surgeons, a military officer, and a lawyer. This committee of 5 Swiss men went on to become the International Red Cross, the world's oldest aid organisation. A year later, on the 22nd of August 1864, it persuaded governments around Europe to adopt the first and original Geneva Convention. 12 states signed it: Switzerland, Belgium, Denmark, France, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and Portugal, along with Baden, Hesse, Prussia, and Württemberg, which are now all part of Germany. The convention consisted of 10 articles designed to protect wounded and sick soldiers, whichever side they were on.
Article 1. Ambulances and military hospitals shall be recognized as neutral and, as such, protected and respected by the belligerents as long as they accommodate wounded and sick.
In 1901, Henri was co-awarded the first ever Nobel Peace Prize for both of these achievements. Since then, there have been 3 more Geneva Conventions, all designed to protect those who do not fight or who no longer fight during conflicts. In 1907, the Second Convention added protection for victims of maritime warfare. In 1929, following the First World War, the Third Convention related to prisoners of war. And most recently, in 1949, after the Second World War, the Fourth Geneva Convention included protection for civilians.
Rachel Naylor with the story of the Geneva Conventions and the birth of the International Committee of the Red Cross. The excerpts from the writings of Henri Dunant were read by Henri's great-great-great-grandnephew, Gabriel Martinez. Our thanks to him. And with that highly evocative piece of military history, we've come to the end of this edition of the History Hour. As ever, we'll have more for you next week, so I hope you'll join us again then. But for now, this is Max Pearson. From all of us here, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
We did something that no one else had ever done.
There was such a excitement and energy about this moment.
It opened the door for everything that rapidly followed.
Witness history. History as told
by the people who were there.
I was walking in space, the first man ever to do so. I felt almost insignificant, like a tiny ant compared to the immensity of the universe.
Witness history from the BBC World Service.
Listen now. Search for Witness History wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.